Hello, members. Tom Morrison here from the home office of the Metal Trading Institute in White House, Tennessee. Yes, we just moved our offices this past month from Hendersonville, Tennessee to White House, Tennessee to a new building. We're so excited to be there and call it our national office. Hoping to y'all in the White House, Hendersonville, Nashville area, you call this home office and we'd love to treat you. But today we're here to talk about industry specifications. It's our quarterly update. Lots of activities going on. MTI just came out of its 90th anniversary celebration, our fall meeting in Tucson, Arizona. Lots of activity going on there and lots of things been happening. We just had a Nadcap and AMEC meeting, and we're going to unpack those meetings for you here today. And so I guess what we always start off with, if we could have each person, I'll call your name, if you could just share with our listeners, people watching in, who you are, what company you work with, and your role in the MTI Technical Standards Leadership Committee. So Mr. Bob Ferry, we'll start with you.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm Bob Ferry from FPM Heat Treating. We're out of Chicago. And basically, I'm part of the MTI Technical Standards Committee. I'm a co-chair of the committee. And I try to address issues that come up with Nadcap or CQI-9 are the areas that I'm involved in the most. And of course, I do try to weigh in on some of the AMEC standards as well, but that's what I do for the committee.
Awesome. All right, Joanna Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. Johanna Lisa, Continental Heat Treating and Quality Heat Treating. I'm quality director for my two companies, and I've been Nadcap accredited for the larger of the two since 2020 and the smaller of the two, 2023. As part of the Technical Standards Committee, I report out on the NMC activities and the heat treat task group.
All right, thanks, Joanna. Stephen Keckler.
Hi, I'm Stephen Keckler. I work for Thermtech, so that's out of Waukesha. My assistance with the MTI Standards Committee is I sit with ASTM with a focus on hardness testing and metallography.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. And Mr. Ed Engelhardt.
Ed Engelhardt, Solar Atmospheres. I co-chair with Bob Ferry and do the AMEC, Nadcap, and some of the AS stuff with the Technical Standards Committee.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. And our special guest today to report out on some stuff with Nadcap and specifically the AMEC committee, Doug Schuler. Share with everyone. I'm sure everyone on this call probably knows who you are, but you tell them anyway.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you for inviting me to be here to share with you some of the updates in regards to the most recent AMEC meeting and the Nadcap meeting and those standards that just don't ever seem to stop being updated. So I'm happy to put in my 2 cents to help the MTI members maintain the best that they can. I am the owner of Pyro Consulting. In that role, I'm a consultant, but I'm also a contracted Nadcap lead auditor, as well as the sponsor of AMS 2750. And I try to participate as much as I can at the AMEC level and at the AMS Committee B level. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I'm Tom Morrison, CEO of the Metal Treating Institute, and it's so exciting to be a part of a group that is making such a difference in this industry. Whenever I go to AMEC meetings or we have our special meetings during Nadcap, I always get members come up to me really touting the work that this committee is doing. This is just a few of the people. There's about 25 people on this committee overall. They meet quarterly to go over things that's going on and all these things we're going to talk about. And it's just really big deal. And everybody always talks about what comes out of these quarterly updates here to keep you in front of the change, not behind the change. One of the things you'll learn about MTI, if you haven't all these years, is MTI is really led from the front on issues, not led from the back. And that's what I've been proud of the board, really taking lead issues and really taking them down. So Bob, let's start with CQI-9. I mean, that's big in the automotive world. What's kind of the things going on with CQI-9?
Okay, so pretty much as we've been talking about there, we are going through the rewrite. Well, it's a revision 5, right? So everybody's working off revision 4 at this time, and they are now updating it to revision 5. And it basically started out where they took all of the questions that were sent in from revision 4 to the AIAG group, and we're going through them one by one and addressing all those issues and determining which ones have an impact that maybe need better clarity in the specification, or an add to the specification to resolve any issues. So with that, they've gone through all of those questions that have been in so far. We meet on a monthly basis and go through those issues. And then there's sub teams that have different areas of specialty that they work on and then bring it back to the committee, and then we all talk about. So one of those areas that we're working on is the pyrometry area of the CQI-9 standard. And there have been questions that came back to the committee on that. And so we're rewriting that section a little bit to add more clarity, not to make a lot of changes, but to add more clarity to the standard and to try to address some of the questions that came back to us. We're working on new process tables as well to add to the standard. One of the process tables that they're working on is aluminum extrusion heat treatments. So that's an area where they may make these extrusions already based on how they process them. They pretty much wind up using them in their with their mechanical properties that get yielded through the thermal treatment of the extrusion process. So they want to control those parameters better than what they have now. So they are working on that. We are working on a checklist for some of the CQI-9 pyrometry requirements. Certainly anybody that's familiar with Nadcap checklist, it's not going to be anything near that. They're trying to keep it to a 1 or a 2 pager, right? So we're trying to work on just a listing of what the requirements are, so that no one that is using the standard misses any of the requirements for thermocouples or instrument cals or temperature uniformity surveys. We just want to put them out there so everybody knows what they have to comply with. So that's coming. We also, we require better documentation on a TUS than what has been required so far. So we're talking about like when you're using heat sinks for your TUS surveys. We want to be more specific from a committee standpoint. Is that, well, what size heat sink are you using? What is, are you running it with a load, without a load? All of this stuff needs to be documented so that when somebody comes to audit your facility and they start looking at your pyrometry records, they can see, okay, well, they use the same size heat sink, so everything's same, or exactly how they're evaluating their product. And if you're running it with a load, is it the same load, or are you running a load that may be 500 pounds, and then the next time you're running a load that's 1,500 pounds, and it's going to have different temperature uniformity survey properties because of that. So these are just some of the things that are coming to mind as to what we're doing as a committee. There's going to have a process table on laser hardening as well. We're getting some of that information from Ford. They already have a document that they go out and do some auditing with the people that are doing laser hardening for them. So that's another area that they're looking into. And they're going to add homogenization to the process table C, which is aluminum heat treat. That kind of got left out of that operation, but we're going to put that in. So far, that's where we're at with CQI-9.
Also, so a couple things real quick before we move on to the next thing. I just enabled the chat room. So anybody that wants to ask questions or comments, you can click the chat and then you can just post in there, and then I will be monitoring that. We'll ask the panelists that. The one thing I want to ask on your report, Bob, is thank goodness the parametry page is. Doug, I got to ask you: was the Nadcap checklist ever just 2 pages? Ever?
Well, back in the day when pyrometry was a part of the core checklist, maybe then it was 3 or 4 pages, but I think that's about the smallest it's ever been.
Well, I mean, because I was going to get back to Bob. That's how it starts. It starts at 2 pages, and then over time it begins. So I think that's what's important. I asked that question because I think that's what's important about this committee and the work that the technical standards group's doing is to help. You always have to have standards, and it's a balance between safety, quality, but yet not be onerous and too much trouble and add cost to the system. So I think that's what's important to know where it starts, and then how can we grow it so it's good, but not let it grow out of control where it really becomes an onerous process.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And certainly, automotive group, they have a different viewpoint on their pyrometry standards, and it's not quite as stringent as like AMS 2750 is
Right.
with aerospace product, right? So everybody knows that. But a lot of it has to do with, they're looking at the instrumentation controls that are available today as opposed to what was years ago. And the controllers are so much better. The instrumentation is so much better, and it controls much tighter. So it's, the frequency of their checks maybe aren't as frequent as you would with an aerospace supplier. However, when they look back at their records, they don't see the need to have it more stringent than what they have, because they don't see the need to be, their instruments don't go out. So when they, to the level that they feel they need more checks than what they're currently doing. So
Right.
it's a different attitude.
Absolutely. So are there any, when you look at all the technology shifts, I'm going to ask each of y'all this to a little bit of degree, but is there any conversations about additive manufacturing in the automotive world and the new developments of like AI the last 6 months? I mean, that's a fast-paced thing happening. I mean, is there any conversations going on in either one of those 2 realms?
No, I mean, additive manufacturing, they haven't gone through any kind of standards through automotive at this point. And certainly all the standards are being driven out of AMEC, and ASTM is getting big into developing standards for additive manufacturing, and they're frantically writing them. So I haven't been a part of that group, but I know there is a lot of effort going on in that area.
Well, thanks, Bob, for that report. That's a lot of great information. Now, one of our members said, Bob, is there any effort to have AIQG accept AMS 2750 as the alternative?
So the answer is, it's not going to be accepted as an alternative, because there are a couple of nuances that automotive doesn't relax on. And so one of them being like frequency of thermocouple changes. So AMS 2750 says, you got to check your thermocouple through SAT checks, and you can determine when to replace it. However, you got to do it based on the data from over a period of time, and so the frequency that these thermocouples need to be replaced. And Doug Schuler can tell you better than I, but and then as you're evaluating that, then you determine the frequency that's going to be to the point where it's not going to fail. You're going to replace it before it fails. And automotive says, well, we're not going to mess with all of that. If it's a base metal thermocouple, we are strictly going to go by checking. We're going to replace it if it's over 1200 degrees, operating over 1200 degrees, we're going to replace it every year. If it's under 1200 degrees, you get to use it for 2 years, but you got to replace it. So that's just one of the nuances between the standards. So if you're following AMS 2750, you certainly are meeting the majority of requirements on CQI 9. except for those couple of little nuances. And maybe if we make this pyrometry checklist, you can compare the two to see where one is a little bit different than the other, and it'll make it easier to comply with.
Thanks, Bob. So I got a second technical question real quick. See, I don't know if you've read it, but Jennifer's asking, is there any discussion on item P3.3.4.2.2, tip of the test thermocouple and controlling being 2 degrees and aligning with that of 2750 at 3 degrees?
3 inches, right. So that's one of those other nuances of the CQ9 spec. I've asked to take a look into that. And I promise you, I will address it again on this rewrite and see if we can get anywhere. But I haven't had any success so far. 2 inches, I don't know where that came from, but yeah, I feel your pain.
It's kind of like the 10th of a degree, right?
Yeah.
Let's get it down to the millisecond. To the millisecond.
To me, it is. Yeah.
Right, for sure. Well, Bob, thank you for that. And I love the technical questions. Thank y'all for asking them. Yeah, everybody ask questions if you have them as you go through this. We'll answer them. So as Bob said, that's a nice transition. Bob, you mentioned ASTM and frantically. So Stephen, tell us how frantically ASTM is working over there.
Very. Well, depends on your committee. But so there is a lot going on in ASTM right now. And what I'm going to give you is by no means a comprehensive list. This is mostly just the stuff that was in front of me during the meeting. So I'm actually going to open this just by saying if there's particular specs within ASTM that you use a lot of and you feel really strongly about, I would strongly encourage that either you or someone from your organization get involved with ASTM, get on these committees and participate in these things, because that's how these specs are written and controlled and governed, and they're not going to get any better, and they're probably just going to get worse if we don't have people that care about them involved with them. So there's your soapbox for the day. Now I can get into the actual stuff people want to hear. So get ready for a laundry list of numbers. E110 has a 2023 revision, and there will be more ballot actions to integrate a newly completed PMB as well as some terminology updates. There may be a new revision as soon as late 2024 or into early 2025. I more realistically expect it's going to be probably 2025 will be the rev date, given how things move. E10 and E18 in the upcoming year are almost certainly going to have ballot items for consideration on clarifying what it means to be a fixed location, a movable, or a portable tester, and what that means for the limitation of use, and especially with portables, what it means to qualify as an E18 or E10 portable. The Steel Committee people are still up in fits about portables being integrated into E10 and E18. So expect that to be something you hear from me probably for the rest of forever. E18 specifically is definitely going to have a 2024 rev date codifying that guard banding shall not be used for indirect verification. It's currently a little ambiguous on that. Let's see, E10 and E92 are going to have basically the exact same language added to them. Expect a likely 2024, early 2025 revision based on that text. This one is actually important. Like, if you don't care about anything else, this is the one to care about if you do Rockwell inspection. There's going to be consideration of bringing the ballot, changing the reporting language in E18 so that by default, you would have to report Rockwell as an integer, so a whole number, unless you're otherwise obligated to use a greater degree of precision, either through contract or the way the specification is composed. If you are currently following the appropriate rules of E29, for the very vast majority of us, that should mean we're already reporting in whole integers. Whether or not we're all doing that might be a matter of discussion, but this is actually potentially a really like a really major change to E18 and how it's used and how people consider it. So I would encourage you to think about what that would mean for your shop. And then Tom should be pushing out a poll here shortly with basically a question along this regards on whether or not you would consider it a positive or a negative change. The outcome of that poll is part of what I'm going to use for pushing whether or not we should try to ballot this. So if this is something you care about, and it should be, I would really encourage you to participate in that poll.
Yeah, we should get that out. But when do you need that by, Stephen?
I would need that done before April, which is the next time we all meet.
Okay.
So we've got
Gotcha.
lots of we
Yeah.
right now have lots of time.
It's probably
But-
gonna go, it'll probably go out between now and Christmas. We'll get that poll out, so we got plenty of time to work it and get a good response for it.
So just keep your eyes out for that. That's actually pretty important. And now we're gonna get into the segment where I basically just start rattling things off. Oh, will E18 mandate whole numbers or just permit it? It would be by default, you would always report in a whole integer. And then if your specification or your contractual agreement required it, you would then report with a higher degree of precision. The issue at hand is that many people are reporting it, indicating a greater degree of precision than what is actually there for the vast majority of inspections. And that's kind of the crux of the issue is how precise are your readings actually? And in the real world, the answer is it's not precise enough to report the tenths most of the time.
There's an increase in number of digital machines now that report the 10th of a degree right on the display. So my question would be, even if I don't have a contractual requirement, will I be required to round to the whole number for E18, or can I continue reporting the 10th of a degree of my digital machine?
If this went to ballot and was approved, then you would be required to report it as an integer, unless you made other arrangements. And it's important to note that even with your digital machine reporting in a tenth, following the rules of E29, you should still be rounding that to an integer. Just so everyone understands. Does that answer your question, Doug?
And you're saying that
It
because
does.
that's the accuracy of the tester, right?
The
Right.
precision of the
So
tester, but
look,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah,
there's
certainly a lot of customer specs say round it to the whole number unless your machine is more precise, and then you can report the full decimal. That I know that Boeing spec is that way, but a lot of the prime specs are that way. To my knowledge, right now in E18, there's no requirement to round any results.
actually
this would
that's
be
exactly the
totally brand
opposite.
new.
Is it specifically says you're supposed to round. Very few people follow it, and that's part of the problem. Is that it specifically actually in reporting says you are supposed to report rounded results. That's not what most people do. Most people just report results as found. But if you get into the reporting section, it specifically states that reported results are to be rounded per E29. And then when you follow that chain, that's how you wind up getting to the vast majority of it should already be reporting in integers. The spec just doesn't say that in black and white. It does sort of reference that as a note under section, I believe it's 5.2. Where it sort of leads you down with referencing, hey, you should report this as a whole number.
Yeah, I wasn't reading it like that either, so I'll have to go back and reread that spec.
Yeah. That was one of those things that kind of caught me off guard initially, but it definitely does not say what a lot of us just assumed it said.
Yeah, that's good information.
Rick, so the reason why sometimes they're certified to 2 decimals is because under extremely controlled settings, it may be correct to report it as being accurate and precise out to 2 decimals. But the way those tests are being done, the kind of equipment they're using to perform those exams, they're not necessarily the same as what you and I and the majority of us are using in our shops. But yeah, it's a complicated subject, I guess, is the shortest answer. And that's part of why we're polling the crowd to see if this is something we all think is a good idea, we don't think it's a good idea, etc. So, is there anything else on that before I move on?
I think that's it.
Perfect. All right. So we're getting on to the rattling on part of the subject. ISO 6508 Rockwell is going to have an early 2024 revision date, removing method 1 for determining uncertainty. So if you inspect to that spec, look forward to that changing. ISO 6509, which is Brunel, is likely going to have a very late 2024 revision date. I do not know what changes are in that. E45, that's determining inclusions. It's going to have a 2023 revision date, and then we are likely going to have some 2024, early 2025 ballot action regarding on if exogenous inclusions need to be reported if observed. So that wouldn't mean you had to rate an exogenous inclusion. You would just need to state that you observed they were present. E833 is up for renewal and it is being considered allowed, just go to withdrawn. So if that is a spec you use and care about, make your voice heard. There's a task group formed to write basically a replacement spec for that for modern equipment. That's for photomicroscopy, by the way, in case you're not familiar with E883. E1951 is going to have basically a complete rewrite. Expect a late 2024, early 2025 revision, most likely. E2142 has a 2023 revision date. E81, E896 are both going to ballot without change, so expect everything to stay as normal. Let's see here. I already hit. Yes. E930 is going to have ballot action in 2024 to look at trying to bring its rating system in line with E112. At the moment, there's a bit of a disagreement when you get to the really large grain sizes. E8 has a 2023 revision. It just hasn't published yet. They've added a new annex for doing miniature samples. It's mostly meant for the AM crowd. And then A956, that's LEAB, is going to have some 2024 ballot action to change the verification requirement from being 6 HLD across the board to a percent based, just like all the other hardness testing specs. And that's all of the number throwing I'm hopefully going to do for the day. And then
No, you can feel free to ask any of these questions as well, as opposed to typing.
Well, I just didn't want to interrupt where Stephen was in his reporting. Currently in E18, it says you're more than within bounds to report the precision of the machine you're using. Later on, it says you can you're encouraged to use E29 and go ahead and round to whole numbers, but there's no requirement to do so. So I hope that going forward, they're not going to change that to be a requirement, because I think that was going to cause a lot of unnecessary NCRs and audits because somebody didn't start reporting a less precise value than they are today.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Doug. I think the rounding thing just doesn't sound to be a good thing for me. I think we need to just report the actual numbers that you're receiving off your machine, and you're verifying your machine on a daily basis anyway. So, yeah, but this is, I mean, that's another discussion we can get into.
So here's where there's a bit of a conflict for you. Section 5.2.4 is descriptive, but when you get into reporting, this is what you literally have to put on your published report. When you look at section 9.1, it states in plain text, you shall convert per E29, or sorry, round per E29, convert.
What
So,
section was that? Section
And I
9?
am now quoting section 9.1.1. The Rockwell hardness number, all reports of Rockwell hardness numbers shall indicate the scale used. The report number shall be rounded in accordance with practice E29. See 5.2.4 in note 2 for more explanation.
Wow.
So, like I said, this is already a requirement in the spec. Like, this isn't actually trying
think-
to add a new requirement. This is really meant to clarify one.
Well, I think, however, the disconnect there is when it's pointing you back to 524 note 2, they're saying if you round, you better use E29. I don't think that the verbiage to me is mandating rounding.
Well,
I think that's the key difference.
well, keep in mind, a note is a non-mandatory text item, period.
Right.
But section 9 reporting, that is mandatory. It's completely mandatory.
So how does the
Understood,
committee?
but it says shall be rounded in accordance with.
Practice.
I don't think it has to be rounded. I think it's what it's saying by pointing to 524 is if you do round, you better use E29 because 524 certainly doesn't mandate rounding.
So
I'm
what I'm
okay.
hearing, what I'm hearing here is, first of all, Doug, you've got to attend the ASTM meetings. And the second thing that I'm hearing is, the fact that, well, is the committee themselves, are they on the same page as what you're stating, Stephen? Is that where this is all coming from, or
Yeah, I'm
what's the
basically
temperature of the room?
Most of the users in the room would like this change. Some of the equipment manufacturers were not a big fan of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's something that we can go. I mean, obviously needs to get some clarification, Stephen, from the committee.
Right.
We can get that and we can funnel that back down. You know, if you get some clarification on that, you could provide it back to me and I can send it out to all the members.
Yeah. So that's this is just a small taste of what a normal 6-hour-long committee meeting looks like. So if you think this had some complications and disagreements, you should wait to see what 30 of us in a room do to each other.
Wow. Yeah.
But for the long story short, Doug, is you're not wrong that there's some it is not overly clear on its face if you only consider section 5.2.4, but if you consider section 9.1.1 and 5.2.4 and the text that's in E29, that's how you wind up in that situation. But there are very, very, very few people who read all of one spec, let alone all of two.
So Stephen,
Wow.
if you can read Jennifer Bendel's question there, and maybe if there's anything there that you can make a part of an answer back to me, and I'll send it out to everybody that was on the webcast. So is that all with the ASTM, or you got a quick answer for that one?
One circumstance where you're cutting the average Rockwell hardness test measurement in this instance, you can blah, blah, blah.
So we'll do this. If you want to,
you can easily wind up in a situation where you calculate a false degree of precision, but that's why E29 has you knock off off significant digits. That's why they have you do that.
Okay. Was there anything else on ASTM?
The only other thing I was going to state on ASTM, especially with consideration to additive manufacturing, committee F42, those were the people in charge of all these new additive manufacturing specs. It is like the wild, wild west over there, and they were making all kinds of documents, some good, some many bad, and a lot of them somewhere in between. If you are involved with heat treating additively manufactured components in any way, shape, or form, I highly encourage you get involved and try to keep sanity like in the realm, because right now there's not a lot of it.
Well, it's a new process too. I mean, additive manufacturing isn't like it's everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. So anything else there, Stephen? or is that it?
That's that's everything I got. Unless anybody
Awesome,
else
man.
wants to ask some questions on the subject, I'm happy to keep talking about it. But
Okay, sounds great. We'll move into, well, thank you for everything you did there, Stephen. So we'll move into AMEC and Nadcap. And Bob, which do you think would be better, going with AMEC first or Nadcap?
Probably the Nadcap.
Okay, well, we'll jump into Nadcap, and I'll give Ed some time here to just kind of piece through the general stuff of Nadcap, and then we'll get Joanna Lisa to share her. The funniest thing about Nadcap was when everybody went into the room the first day of the meeting, everybody went into the same room that meeting's been held in, and I walked in, and Amanda Moats from MTI, I said, "Where are you?" She says, "Go in and turn to the right. I'm in the chairs to the right." I'm like, "There are no chairs to the right." And there weren't. But I saw about 7 members in that room, and I'm like, "I'm in the right place." So I sat down, and eventually she goes, "You're in the wrong room." And so I walked out, and sure enough, we were in the room next door, and one of our key players was sitting at the table. It was the non-destructive testing commodity. And there's like 7 members in there and they figured out about 10 minutes into the meeting that they're in the wrong room. So sometimes you don't know where you are in those meetings. So you want to start with Nadcap. So Ed, let's turn it to you and have you give a brief overview of what happened in Nadcap. Then we'll go to Jana Lisa, and then Doug, obviously Doug, and Bob, anything y'all have to say, you just add in.
Yeah, I'm gonna plead ignorance on the task group part of it because I did my first meeting as representative of the NMC. And so I did not get to spend all that much time in the heat treat task group. So I would be happy to lean on Doug and anybody else who was there to back up anything I had to say about the task group. There were comment resolutions on a couple operating OPs for the heat treat task group. It seemed relatively civil, didn't degenerate into any wild action. I know that there was, I think one of the things weighing on the subscriber's mind most heavily was this arrangement with MTL and the heat treat task group's audit criteria for hardness and conductivity testing versus the MTL's expectations of what had to be done. Doug, you're on that sub team, is that correct? Yeah, so you would know way more about those gory details than I would, but suffice to say that there's room to be unhappy from pretty much any vantage point you care to be. But correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, it looks like round robin for Rockwell hardness testing and probably Brunel testing is coming back to the heat treat checklist. Yeah, okay. So I think that's going to be the big takeaway for, most of the MTI membership is that part of the heat treat checklist landscape is going to change. And we're going to be back to doing some round robins on our equipment. Now, that's all going to be internal relative to the heat treat task group checklist, not laboratory proficiency testing, correct?
Well, that part is still out there to be debated yet because MTL group says if it's going to be apples to apples between our checklist and yours, the MTL requires proficiency testing for certain test functions. And we didn't initially include them, but our leader of the heat treat task group says we're going to put apples to apples for right now. And that's the direction we're going in. So the proficiency testing that would be required, I think, is only every couple of years, not for macro hardness, but some of the other functions of tensile and metallography and those kinds of things that would be required at the same frequency that MTL requires, at least initially.
Yeah, okay. So there's some news there to take back and try to digest. I know oftentimes I hear people say, oh, the interlaboratory proficiency testing is nothing, but actually it is something. For a lot of these, you have to have a subscription of some sort to an approved set of laboratories. And it does take time and money to, take a lot of readings and get them submitted. And if you have something that falls out of line with the norm for the cohort that you're testing with, now you got to come back and do some work and probably some more testing. So I don't think this is as quite as harmless as some of those in the commercial world make it sound. For them, it's built into their overhead of being professional, independent, accredited laboratories. And, to me, it completely makes sense. Their work is the kind of work that's going to go to a court in the case of some sort of product failure. And
Yeah.
it stands to reason that they would need that much higher level of validity appended to their work, whatever that is. For those of us in the heat treat world, many people actually overcheck the work we do. We're really making sure that a process did what it was supposed to do. And whether the party upstream from us decides to carry that to the end for the product itself, well, that's something that they really need to learn to deal with. Maybe they can accept it, maybe they can't. In any case, that seemed to be the big topic du jour for the week to me. I wasn't in a lot of the meetings, so is there any other? There was Boeing and GE did presentations that seemed to be fairly enlightening. And trying to remember what else.
Well, I just had a quick question on that AC 7102/5 is, well, not really a question, but even with proficiency testing, as I understand, there's only like 4 or 5 labs in the world that you could send your samples to per Nadcap. Is that correct?
For MTL, that's correct. But I think that's one of the areas that heat treat probably will take some liberty with. I know that Roy Adkins had mentioned, why couldn't we send it between multiple locations within our own company and have it be an external proficiency testing? So that's an area that I think needs to be brought out during the ballot process and see where that goes.
Okay.
By the way, the latest update, I just got an email from Will Farnell this morning that said, because as we left in the Nadcap meeting, the next step was to put it out for its first ballot, and it hasn't come out yet. So I asked him about it. And the reason it hasn't come out for ballot is because the powers that be at PRI have deemed the Word file that we submitted somehow got corrupted to the standard format that they use. So they gave us a fresh copy, and now we're going to have to work through and make sure they didn't change anything inadvertently. But within a very short period of time, the first ballot will be coming out.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks.
So I know we had a very successful HDSTG meeting Monday afternoon. There seemed to be a lot of interest in a wide range of topics, including the effects of P advisories on merit, the revised AC 7000 NMC checklist that has the new fraud and ethical behavior questions in it, as well as the acceptance authority, acceptance media. So those, I've actually been through a couple of audits with the new questions in AC 7000. The auditors don't seem to be terribly concerned. If you have something in there, they're pretty happy to say, yep, you're fulfilling it. And of course, if they don't see any monkey business, then hopefully it'll stay that way. But they are things that you have to go back and make sure you have address for it somewhere in your QMS, and be able to at least put good references against those questions. So when the auditor does look at it, you have something in your system to back it up. Beyond that, I wasn't at a lot of the rest of the task group meeting. Doug, I don't know if you can shed some light on some of the other stuff that might have gone on.
So I think part of it we're going to cover when we get to the AMEC and the first ballot of 2750, because that was certainly a big topic of discussion during NADCAP. I think one of the biggest concerns that I heard during the NADCAP meetings in regards to the AC 7000 and the fraudulent activity bit is that we auditors have been trained that if we think we see something that might be fraudulent activity, we are to report it, but not tell the supplier. So it's kind of an end around to report it to PRI, which might open this big can of worms investigation as to whether or not there was fraud at ABC Heat Treat Company, when really we should all just put our adult pants on. And, you know, if I see something doesn't look right, I'm going to talk to the supplier. And so when I raised that during the training, the answer that I got was, well, Doug, if you feel comfortable bringing it up to the supplier, go ahead and do that, but we're not requiring all of the auditors to do that. So I think that's a concern for you suppliers, certainly. You know, you think you had a decent audit, and then you find out 3 weeks later that there's a fraud investigation going on.
Yeah, you get blindsided by
right
fraud investigation your auditor said nothing about. So those are areas of concern, and you know, if you my comment to that was that perhaps in the opening meeting you establish some form of term and condition with the auditor to please share anything and everything that you find in an open, safe setting. If you think there's something goofy going on, we want to know about it. And that would be best done if you had somebody from top management in the opening meeting, not just the quality manager, but someone from top management saying those words. I think it would give the auditor a lot of confidence that if they see something unusual, they stand a reasonable chance of having a safe discussion about it at the time of the audit, that they don't feel compelled that they have to go an end around and go directly to PRI and then conduct the rest of the audit with you completely in the dark about this accusation or allegation, I guess is a better word for that. So keep that in mind. That's you know, some of these things are getting a little harder to deal with as we move along in the maturing of the system. Last thing I do want to say is just from an experience with PRI and Nadcap, I've had to do a lot of management of change notifications over the last couple of years working for solar. And I want to tell you that although there is a form to fill out, the process is not very well defined at PRI itself, whether it's with scheduling or within the task group. And it's really through no fault of anybody, except that perhaps notification of change was not particularly well thought out as you know, as having some rational or reasonable flow to it within the PRI organization. I also want to make a comment that having gone through this and having terms and conditions of customers that require notification, they are abysmally bad at even acknowledging that they received a notification of a change, much less reacting to it until you're calling them saying, well, we're moving your furnace from this place to that place, and it's going to be out of commission for a week. And now they're excited about management of change. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Even though they had noticed long beforehand. So I am putting this out there to the membership to say, please, if you're going to make a change, your best friend is communications with your customers and PRI, and in some cases, IAQG or your registrar for your AS. And if you're ITAR, you definitely want to be telling them about changes in your system because they have a 5-day limit around effectivity. So be aware that making a change has a lot of implications that you may not have been particularly aware of. And I just want to put that precaution out there for you. As far as Nadcap goes, that's all I have. Johanna's going to cover the NMC stuff pretty well, and I'll chime in if I see anything helpful there.
So Bob, any final thoughts from you before we get into Johanna on just the general Nadcap stuff?
No, I mean, they covered the areas that that I saw. I mean, there was one there was one presentation by the GE representative that I was a little disappointed in. I was hoping they were going to roll out how they're going to change their specifications and make it more in line with AS 2750, and I didn't hear any of that. As a matter of fact, he just reported what their specs are and no change and no plan for change. So I was disappointed in that. Certainly the fraudulent activity. I mean, this is all good discussion. that we're having on fraudulent activity and with what Nadcap is requiring. And Doug, thank you for sharing what they're instructing the auditors to do, because we need to protect ourselves. And before this thing blows up into a train running out of control, if they would just say something, we might be able to explain it during the meeting as to what is actually happening, instead of the auditor walking away thinking that you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. So it's all good advice.
And the question is, when does all the primes know about that?
Yeah. So, I guess Doug would be a better answer on that, but I would think that they get notified after the audit closes. You have 21 days to address any nonconformances, and but if you don't know of any fraudulent activity, I don't know. You'll never get it addressed. So I don't know what the timing is of that. That's a good question. Any answer, Doug?
Doug, you have any idea when they? I know.
They didn't give a time. The question was asked if to date there has been any reports of potential fraudulent activity, and the answer to that question was no, there hasn't been. So I don't even think PRI really knows how that system is going to play out right now, because it's not been used to this point.
I thought the discussion was that the primes all get noticed the moment the box check potential fraudulent activity, and as opposed to waiting until after it is.
No, that's a little bit different. You're talking about potential product impact.
Okay, gotcha. I just want to make sure that was clear.
That's a little bit different.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in the case of fraudulent and unethical behavior that's reported, the auditor goes directly to the staff engineer, if I'm not mistaken, and it becomes his hot potato to deal with. And I don't know that internal to the task groups, much has been said that's really carved in stone about a process to follow. I'm going to guess that the next call would be to the NMC Ethics and Appeals Committee to investigate and follow up. And should it come to light that a particular subscriber's work is involved in that, then at that point, I suspect the subscriber would get a call, or maybe multiple subscribers. But again, the system seems to be very, very loose and ill-defined at best at PRI.
Yeah, in their operating procedure, there is no timing of that at all.
No,
but
right, nope.
But right, depending on what it is that they're reporting, you could have all the primes notified.
Yep.
Which would be a major impact on your business.
Well, what they need to figure out is a really good system of due process, because Tevis brings up a point that I've been bringing up with the product impact in both of them. But does the viewpoint of fraud on Nadcap's part consider the potential implications for legal ramifications against the auditor and or PRI if it has that impact on your business and you weren't given a chance to prove it wrong before word got out? So I think that's something, Doug, that they're going to have to wrestle with. Because I mean, if they reported all the primes and all of a sudden my business took a big dip over that, and it was found that there was no fraudulent product impact, I mean, that was just due to an auditor being aggressive or PRI not,
Absolutely. I mean, by that time, some of the damage has already been done.
Right.
And there's no recovering from that. So that was one of the main concerns that I had about why are we keeping this stuff secret?
Right.
If an auditor sees something, I mean, we're told, that the methodology has gone back and forth as to whether or not we're even supposed to jump in and stop a product from going into a furnace if we know that they're about to produce scrap. Well, my opinion is we're supposed to make an assessment of what happens when we're not there. So if you're about to put it in the wrong furnace at the wrong temperature, that ain't my problem. That's your problem with your customer. So, but if I stop you from doing it, then any supplier anything worth their weight is going to say, well, you didn't give me a chance to catch it. We would have caught it. Right? So that's a huge open doorway. And when we're talking about this fraudulent activity stuff, they require all of us auditors to carry error and omission insurance.
Yep.
So I think
yep.
I think PRI feels that they're covered in regards to any claims from a supplier saying that there's something nefarious going on. But I've talked to the people that underwrite my insurance policy, and they say we wouldn't pay a claim like that because I don't have any say-so in the fraudulent activity claims. I don't have any say-so in whether or not a supplier gets accredited or fails an audit. I just do a report and turn it in. So I don't know what PRI's thought process is there. I just think it's really bad to begin with. I made this comment, and I think that from the mumbles that I got from Johanna, I said, this seems to me like one of the primes got a non-conformance because there was some fraudulent activity. So they're pushing this down through NMC as a corrective action for their non-conformance they got.
Yeah. I think you're totally right, Doug, completely.
So,
all right, we want to make sure we get through the meeting stuff. So let's move on to Bob. If it's good with you, can we move on to Johanna?
Yep, let's
okay.
do it.
Johanna, let's do your MMC report, then we can move into AMEC.
Okay. I do have two things to add to Ed's recap of the Nadcap meeting. First off, Mark Emerson this coming up meeting in February in Greece will be Mark Emerson's last meeting as task group chair, and we have a new Boeing representative. My memory is failing me now. I want to say his name is Jeff Koch. Is that correct, Doug or Ed?
Jeff Koss, Koss.
Koss, yeah.
Koss, thank you. So he will be the new task group chair, starting in at the London meeting.
Hold on a minute. He was voted to be the vice chair.
Vice chair,
I think
right.
he will have to be balloted to go to chairperson, right?
Yeah,
I don't think it's an
Yes,
automatic progression.
Yeah.
Well, procedurally, no, you are correct. It is not an automatic progression, but
He's the presumptive chair.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So, in addition to that, as Ed mentioned, there were ballot comment resolutions on OP 1116 and 14 appendices. And just as an interesting note, OP 1116 for a number of years has had a very low passing grade for auditor candidates. And so that threshold for a passing grade has, well, once the revision comes out, will go from 60% to 75%. So there's a couple of little tidbits in addition to what Ed and Doug mentioned. On to NMC. There's just a tremendous amount of activity going on in NMC. I'll just start chronologically from when the committee meetings were held, starting with a backlog discussion. PRI currently has approximately 1,500 audits that are out of quarter or out of year in some instances. That number has remained fairly steady for quite some time now. So even though they have stated that they were able to clear up year-to-date 200 to 400 audits for this year, there's still that number of backlog audits still remains at 1,500 approximately. To my consternation, they continue to say that this has nothing to do with an auditor capacity shortfall, but apparently I don't know how to do the math in the PRA method, but they're going to be continuing to work all of those backlog audits. The metrics committee, we discussed the current equitable participation metrics, whereby they are grading the participation of subscribers in 3 activities, those activities being voting on ballots, participation in auditor interviews, and conducting observation audits. As usual, the ballot grade is very low at 56% of subscribers are participating in NMC ballots. Auditor interviews are at 94%. It's often high, but there aren't that many interviews, so might be easier to get a high grade when there are fewer questions. And audit observations is at 43%. So One of the issues is they will probably discontinue monitoring the auditor interviews because that is viewed as a business metric rather than a performance metric. So we'll see how that goes. To refresh your memory, a customer satisfaction survey was sent out maybe a year and shortly longer than that to all stakeholders, those groups being staff, engineers, subscribers, suppliers, and task group chairs. Maybe I said that already. 57 questions in that survey, 43 of which were deemed high priority. Those high priority items were categorized and sub-teams were formed to address those. I participate in sub-teams at every opportunity because quite frankly, that's exactly where all of the hard work really occurs. So there has been a lot of activity, which I'll be discussing as I get into the other committees. Standardization Committee, is an enhancement to eAudit.net anticipated to be completed somewhere in late 2024 that would allow auditees to to record their internal audit and their associated documentation, things like equipment lists for heat treat task group online rather than having to post. I know, Bob, you've complained in the past about how difficult it is to post 30 and 40 documents to eAudit.net one at a time.
Yes.
They're hoping to make some changes to eAudit.net to make that process a little easier. They're not anticipating that until late next year. To repeat my statement about sub-teams, there was a sub-team formed. Actually, there are two related sub-teams under the Standardization Committee. One of which started out as addressing Boeing's request to have Nadcap conduct ORM audits as part of a Nadcap audit, ORM meaning operational risk management. There's another sub-team working on establishing cause codes or using cause codes to identify the quality management system root cause of individual NCRs. Those two efforts seem to be aligning to some degree. And so I suspect that those two sub-teams may shortly be merged because there's clearly a disconnect in what Boeing was looking for and suppliers and task groups' understanding of how those metrics are currently not being used, those few metrics that they are capturing as it relates to cause codes. But the ultimate goal is to have the supplier identify the quality management system document, like paragraph number in your internal documents, have the supplier drill down to that level as part of their response to an NCR. Boeing claims that they are currently doing just that when they do a process audit at a supply house, and they report that back to the registrar, expecting the registrar to have their auditors do a better job in those aspects. And so Boeing is looking to have something similar for all of Nadcap. I believe this will be a very long-term effort, and I don't anticipate that there will be any change for suppliers for quite some time, but it is on the horizon. Type P advisories, a very hot topic as always. Just to give you some history, Type P advisories for the heat treat task group are as follows. 2016, 2, 17, 1, 18, 1, 19, 2, 2025, 2021, 10, 2022, 51, and 2023 year-to-date as of October was 46, which represents 6% of the total number of audits conducted in heat treating. For the Nadcap system as a whole, I'll just give you a taste. 2020 was 29 P advisories, 2021, 103. Here's the kicker. 2022, 939. They are projecting that 2023 will be somewhere in the 960 range, which represents 16% of all audits conducted. here's the kicker to that. 0. I repeat, 0 of those P advisories have been confirmed product impact advisories. Now, there is a move afoot to try and reinforce in everyone's mind that this whole P advisory system is not designed to convert P advisories to C advisories. It is an MRB function for C advisories if we have confirmed product impact, and they should not be equated, but that connection just continues to persist. The impact of type P advisories on merit really has been insignificant in the overall. There has been a 2% uptick in merit since the P advisory implementation process, but to me, that's just part of the noise. The cost codes I discussed. Okay, T-Form 1111. Ed had mentioned this in terms of management of change. He was specifically referring to that T-Form 1111. It is NMC's concern that suppliers are not reporting when those changes are made. 45% of them are not reported at all. 42% are reported late in their definition of late. There is a proposed revision to 7,000 to AC 7,000, whereby if your T-Form 11 is not reported within 60 days of the change having been made, there will be an NCR written. Now, we have to be very clear on what the requirements of T-Form 1111 are, and those are technical personnel, change of ownership coupled with change of technical personnel. So there's discussion on what the definition of technical personnel is. That has gone by the wayside, thankfully, because it was deemed that that would just cause more confusion than really serve as any solution to it. But be prepared. There will be a new question on AC 7000. I do not have a timeline on when that revision is to be going out for ballot. Let's see. Type P advisories, there was additional discussion on that topic as it relates to what the subscribers are seeing and whether it is, whether they believe that it is serving their needs or not. For most of the subscribers in the room, they did say it was serving their needs, but they are having some issues with the frequency at which they're being notified. So rather than on an immediate basis, there'll be a weekly notification. So now we have another 7 days delay that we'll be finding out about these things. Let's see. Continuous improvement. There will be some changes to OP 1107, 09, and 12. This goes back to reporting to Oasis and some subscribers who aren't willing to report. It's just this whole P thing is so far reaching and its fingers go so deep into so many different areas. Let's see, NMC for the steering. There will be a change in the split auditor conference, and I think that's about it. I will take my last couple of moments to do my usual urging of everyone to read NMC minutes for all of the committees and also read the presentations that are attached, because that is where most of the meat and potatoes will reside. That's where most of the work is done on the sub-teams. Those presentations come out of the sub-team meetings. So things like the laundry list of P advisory counts I gave you, you will not find in the minutes in the body. You will only find those in the presentation. So I checked the eAudit.net website this morning. The minutes have not been posted. There's the standard, they will be posted by December 1st. And just as an aside, that's one of the topics in the customer satisfaction survey was it takes too long for them to get minutes posted. So keep your eye out on eAudit.net, please. read the minutes, read the presentations embedded in those minutes so that you can get more detailed information than I've been able to give today. And that's what I
Jan,
have.
I don't know if I missed it. Michael was asking if the flow down survey had gone out yet.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the reminder. Good grief. How the hell did I forget this? Okay.
That's why we
So-
have chat.
So at least at my company's flow down continues to be an issue based on the heat treat STSTG meeting that we had Monday afternoon, the first day of the Nadcap meetings. We're not the only ones. NMC continues to claim that they really have no ability to help us solve this problem. I've decided that there has to be a better way than what's currently happening in terms of trying to resolve this problem that has existed since 2020 when I joined Nadcap. So I am working with PRI to compose a survey that will be going out to all auditees, regardless of task group. It's going to all. I asked Bob Ferry and Ed and Tom for some input on those questions. I have been in conversation with Ethan Akins of PRI. We have formulated some of the questions. I'm waiting for some feedback on some additional questions that I submitted for the first batch of questions that I submitted. They were approved, but now we're asking a couple of more pointed questions, which PRI management may not be happy about. So I expect it'll go out in the next, let's just say, month or so, because we're waiting for the powers that be to bless the pointed questions. And thank you again for asking the question.
So did you say your first NADCAP was 2020?
Correct.
Well, I've been coming to NADCAP since 2009, and I will tell you there's two things that they talked about at that first meeting that I was at, and they didn't just start talking, they've been talking. Auditor consistency and flow dance.
Yeah.
So good luck, Joanna. We're hey, you know this. You have a team of us behind you pushing that barrel. So you need help, you just tell us.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I will be hopefully talking to Ethan either this afternoon or tomorrow and try and get this going and get it out and get it approved so that we're not offending the powers that be. And just as a little joke, I don't call it auditor consistency. Doug, plug your ears. I call it auditor inconsistency, but that's just me.
All right, well, Joanna, thank you very much. And I want to just put a big plug in here for Joanna because she does so much for our industry. And not many people know this, but 2 of the NADCAP meetings every other year are overseas in Asia or London, and it's going to be in Greece in February. And Joanna goes to those meetings and reports back out of her hard work what's going on over there. So Joanna, thank you so much. It's one thing to go to Pittsburgh or to a Dallas, but to go overseas like that twice in a year is a big deal. So we just thank you for all your work for that.
You're very welcome, and thank you, and thank Jim, the owner of our company, for being so supportive.
Absolutely. All right, so now that we've got NADCAP behind us, now, Doug, you bring us home with some AMEC.
Okay, I can do that. One more thing, though, in regards to NADCAP that I wanted to touch on that we missed. It was presented not only to the auditors, but also in the open session of the NADCAP meetings that over the last year, 107 non-conformances have been voided. That represents about 3% of all the non-conformances written. If you look at it in terms of how many audits were done, it's closer to 10% of every audit. 10% of the audits that were done had at least one NCR that got voided. Now, what this means is we've got some very new auditors and we've got some longer time auditors that are just not interpreting the requirements correctly, and these NCRs are getting thrown out. There's a couple of reasons for it. I think as a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of NCRs have already been plucked years ago for suppliers. So it's much more difficult to find something staring you in the face as an auditor to write as a non-conformance. I think some auditors just can't bring themselves to pat you on the back and say, good job, keep up the good work. They've got to have at least one or two. So I think they're really getting down into the weeds to write stuff up. And the good news is that they are being voided. The other thing is that I think the more that individuals like Ed Engelhardt and Johanna and the rest of us harp on the suppliers to say, don't roll over and take it. If something doesn't sit right, there is an action that you can take to discuss with the auditor. If that doesn't work, you can discuss it with the staff engineer. If that doesn't work, you can ask for task group resolution. And ultimately, if that doesn't work, Op 1113 is an appeals process. And so I think finally some suppliers are getting a little more brave to start questioning these non-conformances that have been written, and they're having a lot more success at getting them tossed out. I just got an email yesterday from somebody that they received 4 non-conformances during their audit, and 3 of them are about to be voided. So I think the bottom line is, if you don't question and solidify that it's legit, if you just roll over and say, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this to fix it, now you've just roped yourself into doing all these additional things to fix a problem that really didn't exist in the first place. So just be cautious of that.
Well, you know what,
So
Doug?
Doug,
That brings up a great point, that when you're audited every 12 to 24 months, something might say that you might be even improving,
right.
which means
Right,
you would
think-
have less audits over time, less findings over time.
Let's find it. So,
What do you got, Bob?
so I was going to ask Doug, it's like, all right, so does that 10% just apply to heat treat audits, or is that total Nadcap audits?
This was just heat treat that was reported.
Just heat treat. Wow.
Yeah.
So, if the auditee does not push back or inquire about an NCR, I don't think the staff engineer is just going to void it on their own, are they?
Well,
No.
they haven't been. That's one of the things I've been trying to change their mindset, because long as we're on the business of talking about fraudulent activity or unethical behavior, if a NCR is written and a staff engineer knows it's not legit, but they don't void it just because the supplier didn't ask for it to be voided, I think
Right.
that's unethical.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have been told by staff engineers, completely independent of one another, in the course of conversation on this very topic, and to the person, they said, look, if the supplier doesn't pick up on it, that it's not valid, I'm not saying anything. So it is entirely up to the supplier, if they think they have a case, to knock it down. And I strongly recommend it, because it is surprising what gets written up and that really is not valid. And if you don't push back, it's like Doug said, you're going to spend money and time on a fix that will then just cost you money and time every time you deal with it down the road in an inefficient procedure or a less than ideal practice, and you're going to pay for it over and over again for years. So
Right.
be very critical about what gets written up as a finding, and make absolutely sure that you actually didn't meet the standard. There's a lot of ways to meet the standard, and if the auditor doesn't understand your way, but you strongly have evidence that says that it meets the standard, don't take it. And just for the sake of audit strategy, there are a lot of times we'll get to a certain point in pushing back with the auditor, and we just decide, you know what, he's going to write it up, but our first round of responses is basically going to be a rebuttal. And we go ahead and put it right in with all the full evidence and go, you know what, we're going to throw ourselves at the staff engineer and see what they say.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will say is, I mean, don't make everybody's life miserable and just start objecting to every finding that you have to the staff engineer, because that's not going to bode well either. But you absolutely gotta have a case for.
You need to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
The system will fail just by the weight of people's lack of self-awareness about what it is they're doing every day.
Well, what you
So,
don't want
no.
to do is normalize a finding that should not have been normalized. Because like you said, Doug, once you say, okay, I'll build a
Right.
corrective action around that, you're building a corrective action around something that's not a finding.
Yep.
And that can't go anywhere but bad.
And it's
Right.
not only that, the other unintended consequence of that happening is, as you know, we auditors have to go back and review your last audit.
Right.
And so if I come to audit you and I go back and review 3 findings that weren't legit, but they were upheld, then I could say, oh my gosh, I should start writing those findings for other places. I never thought of that one.
Yeah.
Right. And so that bad finding gets propagated over
Right.
and over and over throughout the system. So if you really do your due diligence and hold their feet to the fire, then I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Normalization of deviancy.
Yeah,
All right.
thank
So
you.
Doug, can you wrap the AMEC up in
Yep.
like 10 minutes?
Yeah, it actually was a pretty good meeting. It was rather short in terms of a 2-day meeting. We could have done it all in one day, but we took a nice little tour to the Boeing 787 facility, which was really nice. So that was really great. The specs that we really went through to work on included several in the 2759 series, the /6 and the 12 for nitriding, automated gas nitriding and regular gas nitriding. Those are in the ballot processes and they're very close to being finished. I think there's one more ballot that's going to come down the pike for those. There was only 1 or 2 comments that had to be resolved. Nothing that was extraordinarily difficult to resolve. The /9 for hydrogen embrittlement was discussed, really doesn't affect us much as heat treaters. The /10 and 11, so we got the stress relieve and gosh, I forget even now on the top of my head what 10 is. 10 is that's the automated gas nitriding, and 12 is the gaseous nitrocarburizing. So those are the ones that had a couple of comments left, but they're going to be moving forward here shortly. The 2 bigger ones in question were kind of related to one another because of the knockdown drag out fight that's been happening for AMS 2770 and the requirement in 2750 for the radiation test, which back in Rev F began to include vacuum brazing of aluminum equipment. And so there had been a big uproar about it, and we need to rewrite 2770 to take an exemption to that requirement and yada, yada, yada. So it didn't go in one particular gentleman's way. So he kind of threw his hands up and says, I don't want to be a part of it. So Heather Falcone took over as the sponsor of 2770. There are a couple of other ancillary things in 2770 that do need revised, by the way, but I think in the right alongside of it in 2750, we had some closure regarding this radiation testing of this type of equipment. So it's kind of bugged me for a while that 2750 was alloy specific for the radiation test, because to be honest with you, aluminum is the only material that would require it to begin with. But typically we don't specify alloys or specific materials in 2750. So what I decided to do with the revision team is to back away from the requirement in 2750 and handle it by saying in 2750, when required by the applicable material or process specification, the radiation test shall be done as follows. So how you do the test will be in 2750, but then it will require 2770, 71, 72, any other aluminum specs. It will be incumbent upon them to add a line in them that says you do or you do not have to do the radiation test in 2750. So that seems to put everybody at ease, because now in 2770, they can just say, hey, for solution treatment equipment for aluminum, we've got to do the radiation test, but not for brazed vacuum brazing of aluminum. So I think we've got a resolution in regards to that. So 2770, the team that's working on it is just kind of getting their wheels turning a little bit. I would expect that maybe sometime after the January meeting, it'll come out for a ballot at that point, perhaps. Probably not before then. Now, in regards to 2750, we had our first ballot for Rev H. There were, I think, a total of 135 comments. Many of them were editorial. Some of them were technical. We worked our way through the technical things at the last AMEC meeting. We got just about all of them resolved. And matter of fact, as soon as this meeting's over, I got another WebEx with a couple of guys to finish resolving their technical comments. But coming out of the AMEC meeting, 2750 is going to be coming out here in the next week or so for its second full 28-day ballot with Rev H. Now, in regards to changes in 2750, the lion's share of it is all clarification stuff. There's nothing earth-shatteringly new in Rev H. In fact, there's a couple of places that the spec has actually relaxed a little bit. You know, if you use any extension days on any tests right now, quality has to have a written justification as to why you went over that why did you use an extension day? So that footnote is going away. Thank goodness. It was no value to tell why you used an extension day to begin with. So that's gone. Also, rounding. There's been a lot of NCRs written about rounding. Well, now that we're actually to the 10th of a degree in 2750, believe it or not, there have been auditors running around because some supplier didn't carry the 100th place out to the final calibration result or test result before rounding the 100th place. So, my gosh, what insanity when we're talking about uncertainties that 2750 doesn't even mention, uncertainties in whole number values, and we're worried about 100ths of a degree. So, you know what? We couldn't get people to agree on the 3 or 4, I guess it's 5 different paragraphs that are in that section today in Rev G. So I said, look, we're going to scrap it. And we're just going to say, look, if you round, first of all, you don't have to round, but if you round, you have to have a procedure and apply it consistently. You can use E29, you can use some other standard, you can use Microsoft Excel or some other spreadsheet program, and you can round everything to the 10th of a degree. Done, end of paragraph, end of everything. No more absolute method in E29 or you can't round the final answer back into compliance. We're talking about 100ths of a degree, rounded to 10ths of a degree. Go ahead and do it. It's not going to hurt anything. So that's the direction we're going in with those things, making your lives a little bit easier. I think it will make the lives of the auditors a little bit easier as well because the requirements won't be so difficult to figure out. There's a couple other places where there's some added examples and added clarity and those kinds of things. But other than that, everything is pretty straightforward. So there is an advisory from Nadcap that will be coming out in the next week or so regarding this whole rounding thing and the fact that we're not interested in the 100th place. So that will be the placeholder until Rev H gets approved, hopefully next summer. That's the plan anyway. So I think we're on track to get that done. So the next AMEC meeting will be in January out in Monterey, California. And then shortly thereafter in March in Rhode Island will be the Committee B meeting. Okay.
Are they going to do any other field trips during that January meeting?
I haven't heard if they are or not, but I think there's some willingness to do some of those going forward.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing.
All right, Doug, is that it?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Well, Joanna and
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you for your work. Bob and Ed, thank you for your leadership. Doug, thank you for being a special guest today. Bob, you got anything you'd like to say?
I just want to say, you know, all these committee members and Doug, thank you for participating. You know, you guys are awesome. You do great work out there. You really are strengthening our membership and our committee. So I want to thank you personally for everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Well,
I'll second that.
I want to say to the members listening in, I mean, you got a lot coming at you. You got uncertainty in the marketplace. You got specifications rallying around you all the time, changing audits, and you have labor shortages going on. You got a ton of stuff. And here's what I want you to know. And I think anybody on this call would say, MTI has your back. We bring in groups of people rallying the movement to get things around you so that you can be successful. That's our number one goal every day when we come in is your success. And so we thank you for your membership. Stay tuned in, get involved. And if there's anything you need from us, you go to our website at heattreat.net or email me personally at tom@heattreat.net and tell me what you got. And we'll connect you to somebody or some information that will help you get what you need. So thank you very much. And we slated an hour. Specs never sleep. And we went an hour and a half. So we're going to have to change that. So, but thanks everybody for your day. And we'll see you next time.
Take care, all.
See ya.